happens to us in the future, Doc?
It's your kids, Marty. Something's got to be done about your kids.
What do you mean?
Your daughter marries a black man.
Hey there, everyone. That sexy nerd is coming at you again. And we're watching Nostalgia Critic's Back to the Future movies. Wow. I thought when I saw this the first time, I was like, oh man, he's doing the first Back to the Future, but nope, he's doing all of them. I don't know. I don't know if this works. I wish he would do individual reviews, kind of like his normal shtick, with individual movies, because I believe that each one of these deserves a review on their own. He can make jokes about it, but he's probably like, oh, it's too good for me to make jokes. I'm like, come on, Doug. But whatever. I mean, like I said, also the Shrek movies could have used an individual review. The Austin Powers movies, all those movies that he's done, all could have used an individual review. But hey, what are you gonna do? I mean, maybe he'll do it in the future. But yeah, I love Back to the Future. I've always loved Back to the Future. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's actually one of the first movies I ever saw. Like, my favorite movie of all time is Jaws, but I never had it on VHS for the longest time until I was like maybe 10 or so, because it was like unedited or something like that. I don't know. But what I used to watch the most was Back to the Future. Even though I didn't get a lot of it because I didn't realize it was his mom, or maybe I didn't realize it, or maybe I was too young to understand. I would just watch the pretty colors and stuff like that because I was just a kid. But not only do I have that as my source of nostalgia, but also Back to the Future, the ride from Universal Studios. You guys remember that when that thing was open? Oh, best ride ever, It had dinosaurs in it too, so, the only time Back to the Future ever saw dinosaurs. Oh, God. But anyway, let's see enough of my nostalgia. Let's just get into the episode. And remember, please like and subscribe if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content. And let's do this thing.
Oh, I'm a nostalgia critic. Is there any critic that hasn't talked about these movies yet? Robert Zemeckis' Back to the Future movies are a series of films.
Or are these all of the movies?
Talk about for a while, and I just didn't see the point. Everyone has talked about these flicks, usually in the highest praise. And there's tons of videos pointing out all the little details in the background, foreground, setups, payoffs. People love to dissect these movies, and rightfully so. So what could I add that would be unique to this?
Your opinion.
When I thought about it, there was a different way I saw these movies. Well, growing up, I always liked these movies, but I didn't love them. And I was curious why other people did. Don't get me wrong, I do see it now, but these movies, particularly the first one, were on such a high pedestal and praised so much, I was kind of surprised it gave me exactly what I thought I was gonna get. It's a time travel movie about messing up the past, trying to fix it, and simultaneously trying to get back home. It was done well with a lot of charm, but nothing surprised me about it. It felt like something I saw in a lot of Saturday morning cartoons. But it hit me, it was in a lot of Saturday morning cartoons of the time because they were inspired by it.
Oh.
Hell, they just cut the middleman and they made a Saturday morning cartoon out of it. And I can imagine Back to the Future both as a standalone film
I think I saw that show. Yeah, Back to the Future, the TV series. That's right.
The trilogy have had an even bigger impact over the years in our media. Jesus, even their parodies have become incredibly influential.
Yep.
So I guess I wanted to get the point of view as someone who kinda had to be reintroduced to the idea after being raised on the watered down versions.
Okay.
On top of that, while I was too young to see the original on the big screen, I was just the right age to see the sequels on the big screen. And I noticed a big change with audiences on these compared to when they first came out. So, I guess there's no other way to frame it except this is my personal reaction growing up with the Back to the Future movie.
Okay.
Released in 1985 and starring Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox, arguably at his busiest, but soon about to become a worldwide phenomenon because of this, Back to the Future is the almost straightforward story about a boy named Marty McFly who befriends a kooky scientist named Doc Brown. Brown builds a time machine and Marty accidentally goes back 30 years, ruining his parents' meeting, which means he may not exist in the future. He tries to hook him back up while also fighting off a menacing but hilariously dumb bully named Biff, played by Tom Wilson. Now I say almost straightforward because, as a lot of people pointed out, it is a little weird a grown man hanging out with a high school boy at the time. As I mentioned, a lot of Rick and Morty setup is playing off of why the hell a genius scientist would do this. That show plays it off as he uses the boy as a pawn.
Yeah.
Other theories, we're not going to go into if I still want this to be monetized.
Ew.
I always did take it as kind of a cartoony thing, like there's just some stuff you don't question in this universe.
Yeah.
I mean, look at these two. They're so cartoony, they literally made 2 cartoons based on it. I don't think you were supposed to think that hard about it, and at the time, people really didn't. On that note, for 1985, the old man makeup on Christopher Lloyd is pretty damn impressive.
Yeah.
As a kid, I legitimately believed he was an old man. The other old makeup,
It was bad.
looks more like typical 1985 makeup. But that's one of the fun things about this movie. It's both timeless and dated in all the right ways.
And you know, like most CGI, like even some of the greatest movies from the 1980s have really terrible CGI. Terminator, for one thing. Like he put it very best. It looks like Jack Skellington trying to chase after them or something like that. A robotic Jack Skellington. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much it.
The time machine is a DeLorean. It opens up with power of love. There's 80s catchphrases
Power
all over the
of
place.
love.
Yet somehow all of these represent the time period perfectly without sounding like it's trying to manipulate younger people into liking it. Hell, some of this writing is needed to show the disconnect between the 2 time periods, and it's legitimately believable and funny.
It's true.
Whoa, this is heavy. There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
No.
It goes without saying, not only are all the performances in this charming and memorable, but they work on both a cartoony level and more subtle level. Doc Brown is totally a mad scientist caricature. Marty's father is a typical geek stereotype. But there's a lot of storytelling elements that I didn't pick up on until I was older. For example, I love how Marty essentially has to teach his father about important things in life,
That's
much like
true.
his father probably taught him. So we go from a father who's shaping a son to a son who's shaping his father. I know as I got older, the idea of accepting my parents had rebellious parts of their youth was very foreign to me. Honestly, I feel like a lot of kids don't really process that their parents have a life before them until a certain age.
That's
So it's great
true.
to see Marty's mother break all the rules you know she taught him not to break.
Also, I'm just realizing that. Was she drinking peach schnapps from the bottle? Ew. That looks like peach schnapps. And, I mean, it's okay to drink, but, you know, it's like way too sweet.
Geez, you smoke too?
Marty, you're beginning to sound just like my mother.
A lot of truth, a lot of growth, and a lot of hilarity all going on at the same time. And yet, even when I was a kid, I knew Marty's mom making out with him was eerie. It is one of the few things where as you get older, it actually gets grosser, therefore more
Yes,
inappropriate, and
that is
therefore
true.
funnier.
That is true.
But still gross. I remember really connecting with little character moments, like subtle little touches. When I was a kid, I was really fascinated by Doc Brown watching his future self over and over. It's a scene that comes across as legitimately realistic, as I remember thinking if
is.
I saw myself in the future, I'd probably obsess over what I would be like and what
too.
happens in the coming years too.
Anyone would.
And if you are watching past me from 20 years ago, just remember, as bad as I look, everybody else looks worse. It goes without saying there's dozens, maybe even triple digits of small details sprinkled throughout this movie that are set up and paid off brilliantly. And again, you can search countless videos that try to list them all. While I won't even begin to list all the ones I noticed, I will admit it was fun growing up and always finding some little touch I missed the previous times I watched it. One of the most refreshing things about this film is that the lesson isn't like most teen movies that center around just being yourself. The lesson is stand up for yourself. If
yeah.
someone is giving you shit, fight back. You might accomplish more than you think. And yeah, okay, that's nothing too new, but let's think about it. Marty is essentially losing the mother and father who raised him and being replaced with new and improved models.
So weird.
It's honestly kind of selfish, but it's also really funny and does still serve the point that standing up for yourself when you need to can get great rewards. It isn't a if only they knew the real you inside kind of thing. It's a hey, when shit's getting real, you get real too, asshole. Maybe you'll get the hot car if you start acting that way. I don't know, it's a message we heard before, but it's saying it in both a funny and kind of badass way.
Yeah.
On that note, I am one of those people that doesn't usually get into time travel stories where you can change the past. Because yeah, I'm one of those dicks that says if the past doesn't stay the same, then you can't go to the point where you travel back in time to begin with. I'm a diehard 12 Monkeys guy.
Really?
For years, that turned me off to this a little bit. I still
I gotta watch that movie. Probably movie reaction.
liked it, but it was just a little nitpick in the back of my mind. But what I love now is how things bizarrely keep working out. I don't think it's the timeline straightening itself out because, again, they show you can change the future. It's just the mother of all coincidences constantly happening. The guy who would write Johnny Be Good happens to get a phone call during
Johnny
Marty's
Be Good.
performance. His mother just happens to like the name Marty for a son. The future mayor happens to get the idea from Marty telling him. It's actually a little funnier to consider the future can be completely altered however you want, and just by mere chance, only Biff and the McFly family changed. That is really hilarious. There's of course several more reasons by several more critics that can point out why this film is so special. The epic music, the great effects, the layers upon layers of family dynamics and values from different time periods. But these are the ones that grew on me from childhood to adulthood. And without even knowing it, was becoming more and more of a classic the more I thought about it. And of course, there's that setup to a sequel that Zemeckis admitted was not a setup to a sequel.
You've got to come back with me. Where? Back to the future.
It was just a funny way to end the movie, like a here we go again setup where Doc is literally going back to the future.
Yep.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need
Roads.
With the film being such a big hit, though, a giant to be continued was added in later, and this supposed always planned trilogy began. Did it pay off? Financially, yes. Everything else? Eventually. I'll tell you after this. In 1989, after the smash hit of the original, Back to the Future Part 2 was released, and man, talk about a film everybody changed their minds about, because when this first came out, I didn't know anyone that liked it.
I loved
Not
this
that I
movie.
knew anyone that hated it either,
I
but
saw
the
it.
response was usually the same. It was underwhelming. A lot of what you would expect from a Here We Go Again sequel coming off the
Michael.
heels of a critical and audience-pleasing phenomenon. The setup is Doc wants to help Marty's kids in the future. Again, I don't know why this grown man is so obsessed with this kid. But in trying to solve the problem, an older version of Biff travels through time and rigs it so he becomes rich, marries Marty's mother, and kills his father.
Should have said he
Doc
becomes
has to
Donald
go
Trump.
back to the 50s to find the point where Biff interacted with his younger self, which means they have to redo the same moments they already redid. A clever idea, and honestly some of my favorite stuff is when they have to go and recreate scenes from the last movie. There is something impressively expensive yet also cheap about a Here We Go Again story using time travel to literally do the exact same thing again.
It was cool.
But the film is a
Clever.
little all over the place. A lot of people at the time had issues with it being much darker than the previous one, but that never bothered me. A second part should be darker. It's the fact that it's not that much fun to me. There weren't as many jokes as in the first one. There's a ton of unpleasant moments that don't seem particularly clever. And I know I'm probably gonna sound sacrilegious, but I think the future in this is pretty forgettable. And yeah, I know, make whatever 2015 wasn't like that joke you want, but even when this future was decades away, I still thought it was pretty boring. It's just all the generic future stuff you would expect. Flying cars, holograms, weird fashions. There's only two things that really stand out to me about this future, and I guess it does to everyone else because I constantly keep seeing them at conventions.
The sneakers, huh?
One is Marty's
Yeah.
clothes. Those shoes and that hat are pretty fun. And the other is the hoverboard.
Oh, of course.
Yes, I will concede the hoverboard is absolutely
great.
amazing.
Uh-huh.
It's a cool idea. It looks great. It's a surprisingly good effect. How can anyone not love this thing, and how do we live in a future where we don't have this yet? Screw the flying cars, get the flying board figured out, and the cars will follow. There's also a little bit of a show-off factor in this movie when it comes to the effects, which sometimes works in a Zemeckis film, but other times comes across as
I see
awkward.
it.
The makeup, again, just isn't that great. Even in 1989, come on, Amadeus won an Oscar for age makeup in 1984. You couldn't do better than this?
Oh.
It also tries to do a lot of split screen effects that are certainly ambitious, but again, looks like they're trying to show off their budget. They were impressive for the time, but maybe because
I
every
see
other
it.
scene is an over-the-top effect, it comes across as more distracting. Poor Tom Wilson here is overacting like a lot of actors do when they try to play against themselves. And this is with a purposeful over-the-top performance already. Trying to distract from the effect, but ironically drawing more attention to it.
I never noticed it.
Tom Wilson is the one thing where even when he's not great, he's still great.
Yeah, well, I'm busy.
Yeah, doing what?
Washing my hair.
Oh, that's about as funny as a screen door on a battleship.
He has to go back and forth constantly between being a laughable doofus and a straight-up psychopath, forcing himself on women, abusing them, and like I mentioned before, even committing murder. The tones are all over the place, but he always delivers, clearly giving what the director wants.
He's a
Even
good
if what
actor.
the director wants is an awkward as hell line like,
I'm gonna marry you someday, Lorraine. Someday you'll be my wife.
that's crazy weird writing even for Biff. I also feel really sorry for the Jennifer character. Poor Elizabeth Shue is starting her career. She has a role in a sequel to one of the biggest movies of all time, and she's just knocked out for the majority of the flick. Zemeckis admitted if he knew there was going to be a sequel, he would have had her get in the car because he had no plans for her. Romance for the ages, I guess. So yeah, these were my thoughts at the time, and honestly, they haven't changed much over the years, but everyone else's thoughts kinda have. I always saw this as the weakest of the films, but I think because so many people watch them back to back, they see it as the gritty second part. Maybe if it stayed mostly in the future or mostly in the past, or I don't know, pick a lane. Even if it's a lane hovering in the air. But still, come on, the actors are still bringing their usual charm. It's got a decent laugh here and there. There are some good ideas that are utilized. Plus, this was the first time I ever saw a trailer for a sequel in a sequel.
Yeah!
It doesn't sound like much now, but back then, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Parts 2 and 3 were shot back to back, which wasn't unheard of, but was pretty rare. And the third and final part takes place in the Old West. Why West? Why not?
This is the weakest.
It's funny to think you could literally go to any past time period and they just randomly pick the Old West. A part of me thought maybe if they spent the third film going to a bunch of different time periods as the last two already did, the past and future, that would be interesting. But nope, it's just the Old West. And I will admit, when this film came out, everybody I knew really liked it. Now it's seen as the black sheep of the trilogy. It's funny how people's minds change. The story is Doc accidentally gets zapped into the 1800s where he lives happily with his wife Clara, played by
Still a
Mary
good movie.
Steenburgen. When Marty discovers he gets shot dead by Mad Dog Tannen, an Old West version of Biff, he asks 1950s Doc to send him back to save him from already being dead. Yeah, it's a little odd when you think about it. Kinda like the other films, everything you think is gonna happen happens. It's just done once again with really charming actors and great effects. Maybe the best effects of the trilogy. I remember seeing this as a kid not recognizing Michael J. Fox playing his ancestor. Nowadays it's a bit more obvious, but unlike part 2 where it felt like they were showing off with the split screen effects, I really feel like this is how they would shoot it even if there were two separate actors.
Yeah, but then he's also with his mother. I see that now, and ew.
Like I said, on the big screen, it didn't register I was looking at an effect with the exception of one or two moments. And yeah, they pull out all the stops with this being a Here We Go Again sequel to the point where it goes from being funny to unfunny, back to being funny again. Remember those coincidences I was talking about in the first film where everything just happened to line up in a way that seemed impossible? Here, Marty's traveling back in time towards a billboard filled with Native Americans riding towards him, and there just happens to be Native Americans riding towards him in the past. That is so goddamn ridiculous. It's freaking hilarious.
Yep.
They just embrace the repetition. Biff gets covered in manure, somebody calls him a coward, Doc says great Scott, and Marty says this is heavy. Oh, wait, they switched that up.
Great Scott.
I know, this is heavy.
As a kid, I hated this repetition, but as an adult, it is so laughably forced that you have to do exactly that. Laugh. At this point, the film would feel weird if they didn't repeat all these tropes. In my opinion, there's a lot to enjoy about this film, and this is coming from a guy who doesn't even get that into westerns too much. There's a lot of old western stars in the background, including Pat Butterham, who you may remember as the Sheriff of Nottingham.
Everybody everywhere will say Clint Eastwood is the biggest yellow belly in the West.
It has maybe my favorite version of Biff because they can play the most with how crazy or dumb he is.
Forfeit! What's that mean?
It means that you win without a fight.
Without shooting? You can't do that. Hey, you can't do that!
Yes, the original's not too bright, but he can at least count up to 10.
Damn it!
It's got ZZ Top as the band playing an unbelievably hummable earworm. actually works in both
That was
previous
ZZ
movies
Top,
in a
wasn't
way
it?
that isn't always just repeating jokes. And I'm sorry, this Frisbee gag really is kind of brilliant.
Hey, Frisbee. Far out.
What was the meaning of that?
It was right in front of him.
A lot of people don't like Clara, and I won't act like she's an especially well-written character, but honestly, Steenburgen, like a lot of the actors, brings a ton of charm to the character. I'm constantly amazed at how well cast these movies are.
Was this man tall with great big brown puppy dog eyes and long silvery flowing hair?
But I will agree, the one thing that just brings everything to a halt is when Doc has to tell her about the time machine. This is so stupid if you're not going to actually show her the device and just have her take your word for it. It results in a third act breakup that seems so pointless, where the characters just sulk and feel bad about themselves
I remember
for no
this.
reason. You easily could have cut this or rewrote it in a way where he does show her the time machine. Maybe she gets on board and helps out with the action at the end. I don't know, just not this.
I've heard some whoppers in my day, but the fact that you'd expect me to entertain a notion like that is so insulting and degrading.
And on top of that, she needs to be saved like a damsel in distress, literally on the train tracks. And yeah, it's not surprising people associate her with so many bad things. Up until that point, though, I legit think Steenburgen makes it work, and I really do enjoy her chemistry with Lloyd.
Okay.
Come on, how can your heart not melt at the look they give each other here? The film ends with what I think is a pretty clever loophole, saying that the future hasn't been written yet, and so it's up to us to make it the best we can. Which does stick with the idea the film presents that time can constantly change.
Your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it.
So that's why the Cubs winning was a little off. The music is nice, everybody lives happily ever after, the kid makes us question this for years, what the hell is he doing? It just has a good feeling all throughout. But like I said, now people see it as the least of the films. I guess I kind of get it, as people were probably getting sick of the same tropes the third time around, and like I said, there's no reason to set it in the Old West versus any other time period. But there's way too many memorable moments in it for me. I love people in the Old West mocking the future's version of the Old West. I love many of these classic lines.
Is this a hold-up? It's a science experiment.
I love Marty saying goodbye to Doc when he thinks the time machine is destroyed. Hell, the time machine being destroyed is both impressive and emotional. Even the lesser parts of the movie I still really enjoy, and remember them much more than anything from part 2. When I was younger, it was my personal favorite, but now that I'm older, there really is no beating the original.
Oh, of course.
And that's one of the coolest things about it. It can still work as a standalone film, but it can also work as a trilogy. If you're okay knowing there's gonna be a lot of repeating. But the repeating acquits itself a little bit because it's a time travel story, and it adds just enough variations in each one while playing with the tropes of the past ones. Even 2, for all its faults, I still have a soft spot for, if for any reason, just to get to part 3. But that's another great thing about these movies. Everybody's takes are different. With that said, what are yours? Do you like these films as a trilogy? Do you think it should have been a standalone flick? Which one's your favorite? Did it change over time? Have your thoughts varied from childhood to adulthood? Did you even grow up with it? Did you only see it as an adult? Let me know in the comments below as you give me your thoughts about this classic series from the past, and I'll see you once again back in the future. I'm a nostalgia critic guy, remember it? So you don't have to.
He has a very good point. Honestly, if it had to be out in the trilogy, I can imagine them only doing the first one and them just stopping with that. But they did have a really nice ending with the third one. And that's why, I mean, even though I don't like the sequels as much as the first one is like a gift from God to me. But I've always loved the other two. I watched Back to the Future 2 like more often than I watched Back to the Future 3. But they're all really good movies, and I see why they're so highly regarded. And honestly, I can't wait to pass them on to my kids, pass them on to future generations, and honestly, to keep this movie alive, because this movie really deserves it. It really is a timeless series of films. And they've had such a big impact on my life. But with that being said, please like and subscribe if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content. I know this is a little short, but You know, I mean, hey, what else can I say? He pretty much said everything I feel about these movies. So I'll see you all in the next video, everyone. Take care.